The top myths that podcasters believe that keep them from achieving the impact, the influence, and the income they really want. That's what's in store in this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Legit Podcast Pro. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and today we're diving into the critical topic of business and legal myths that podcasters believe and how they can hold you back from greatness. Whether you're just starting out or you've been podcasting for years, this episode is sure to have some nuggets of information that will help you navigate the legal landscape and set your podcast up for long-term success and growth and profit. So let's dive in and get started with myth number one. I don't need to worry about copyright. I'm just too small to be noticed. Well, lots of podcasters believe that their small audience exempts them from copyright law. However, copyright infringement is real and it can lead to serious legal consequences, regardless of your podcast size. It's crucial to understand and respect copyright laws from the start and avoid these potential legal battles and DMCA takedowns and having your accounts shut down and those kinds of things. Myth number two, contracts are only for big deals. I can handle things on a handshake. Well, as nice as that would be, relying on verbal agreements or handshakes can lead to misunderstandings and disputes. Properly drafted contracts ensure that all parties are clear on their rights and obligations and expectations, and that protects everybody involved. Myth number three, I can use any music or sound clips as long as I credit the source. Well, crediting the source of music or sound clips doesn't equate to having permission to use them. Podcasters need to obtain proper licenses or use royalty-free music to avoid infringement issues. Number four, forming a business entity is much too complicated and unnecessary for a podcast. And while that may be true for some really small hobby-oriented operations, operating as a sole proprietor might seem simpler, but forming an entity like an LLC can provide protection from personal liability, as well as tax benefits, as well as a more professional image. I think it's an essential step for anybody who's serious about podcasting and who wants to grow and protect their brand and treat it like a business. And if you are working with co-producers, co-hosts, or really co-anything, an LLC is the best way to clearly define the nature of that relationship. It's kind of a podcast prenup. It sets out the rights and responsibility of the parties and answers all those big what-if questions about what happens and things later. Trademarking the name of my podcast isn't necessary. That's myth number, what are we on? Number 5, I believe. And my scrolling is not working. Anyway, you want to register your trademark to protect against someone else coming into the marketplace and adopting a similar name, which can lead to, brand confusion and potential legal conflicts. Registering your podcast name as a trademark goes a long way to protect the brand identity and ensures exclusive rights to use the name. And if you are interested in a little more information about this, be sure to get my free podcaster's guide to trademark registration by visiting podcasttrademark.com. That's podcast with T. There's 2 T's in it. Podcasttrademark.com. Maybe not the best URL to use. Anyway, podcasttrademark.com. Well, myth number 6 is that monetization can wait, and I'll just focus on it once I have a bigger audience. And while that may seem true, lots of podcasters, after all, delay thinking about monetization until they have some size of an audience. But planning and implementing a monetization strategy early can help you provide valuable feedback and create multiple revenue streams and establish a more professional approach to podcasting. Starting with that professional mindset at the very beginning really is important. Early efforts at monetization will also help you fund growth and improve the podcast quality, and that's how you attract an even larger audience and greater revenue over time. So don't wait too long to figure out how you're going to monetize. Myth number 7 is that legal issues only arise for controversial content. Well, some podcasters believe that the legal problems really only affect those who talk about controversial or sensitive topics. But the truth is, issues can arise from a wide range of varieties. There's intellectual property infringement, defamation, privacy violations. Understanding the legal landscape really is essential for all podcasters, regardless of the kind of content they're making. And adopting journalism oriented practices is really an important way to protect yourself. And it's ethical too. Myth number 8, I don't need to worry about privacy policies or disclaimers. Well, ignoring the importance of privacy policies and disclaimers can lead to legal trouble. After all, podcasts are on the internet, they're out there, and most have websites and a visible web presence. And if the podcast is collecting listener data or providing advice, clear privacy policies and disclaimers, depending on which situation, will protect the podcaster as well as providing important protection to the audience because you outline the terms of service and manage expectations, and they can understand what their privacy rights are relating to the information they give you. Now, myth number 9 is that guest releases are unnecessary if the guest just agrees to be on the show orally. And while it's true that these oral agreements with guests are usually valid, they may not hold up if there's a real dispute. They don't always set forth enough about the scope of what's allowed and what's not, and compensation and whether they're irrevocable and things like that. A written guest release really ensures that the podcaster has the right to record the guest, to use the guest content, and it protects against those kinds of claims that can come up. It provides clear terms for both parties. And you can download my free guest release at podcastrelease.com. Now, myth number 10 says, well, I can ignore listener feedback and complaints without any repercussions. And I wish that was true. Boy, do I wish that was true. But it just isn't. Dismissing listener feedback or complaints can lead to reputational damage and potential legal issues. Engaging with your listeners professionally and addressing their concerns can improve the podcast's quality, foster a loyal audience, and prevent disputes from escalating. Myth number 11, and this is a big one I hear a lot. As long as I'm not making money, I don't need to worry about legal issues. Well, I would love that if that was true, and lots of podcasters believe that it really only matters that you get your legal stuff in order when you start monetizing. But legal concerns, copyright, defamation, privacy, intrusions, those kinds of things, they can occur whether or not you're making money. In fact, in copyright law, actually all of these, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it for profit or making money from it. It's if you violate the copyright, if you infringe the copyright or violate someone's privacy, or you say something false about them and it causes them harm, that's the damage. That's the money that we're talking about when we get into court. It's not about your profits. It's about the victim's losses, the plaintiff's losses. So addressing legal issues right from the beginning really does help avoid future complications and ensure that your show is compliant with all the relevant laws and regulations. And listen, when you're flying by the seat of your pants without any legal structure or protection, you may feel very confident, but inside, subconsciously, you know you're at risk. So you may not be as likely to take the kinds of big and bold actions that propel real success. You're playing to not lose rather than to really win. All right, myth number 12, free hosting platforms are good enough. Paid services are unnecessary. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with free hosting. The platforms that offer free hosting often, though, have limitations on the storage, the bandwidth, or how you can go about monetizing. I think that investing in a paid hosting service really can offer you better support, more features, greater control over your content, advertising, and it's just the right thing to do. Pay for the bandwidth that you're using and make sure it's there for you no matter what. In fact, just earlier today, I learned that Spotify has discontinued one of its production tools that it's been offering for free. This is the kind of thing where if you're relying on that, all of a sudden you're left high and dry when the company that offers it just decides, we can't do this anymore. We're not going to do this anymore. So be thoughtful about paying for the services you rely most heavily on. And I think hosting is probably top among them. All right, myth number 13 says it's too early to think about sponsorships or ads. Well, we talked about this earlier already, but starting to think about how you're going to do sponsorships and ads early on really helps in understanding how to approach those sponsors and what metrics to track. Even when you have a smaller audience, a niche podcast could attract sponsors that want to reach that targeted demographic. My own Entertainment Law Update podcast is a prime example of this. We have a relatively small, in the scheme of podcasting, audience, but in the scheme of entertainment law, we have access to, I would say, most of the practitioners in the field who are out there. And those are affluent, well-educated folks who do spend their money on, discretionary things. And we have successfully had sponsors come onto the show at much, much higher rates than the average CPM rates for the audience size. So don't discount the possibility of having sponsors even when you have a small audience. Myth number 14 is that my podcast is just a hobby, so I don't need to treat it like a business. Well, treating your podcast as a business from the beginning helps to establish professional practices and best practices, and that's what lead to growth and potential monetization. This means having a business plan, a marketing strategy, and financial management. That sound like doing business to you? Well, treat it like a business, and it will treat you as a business treats its owner. Myth number 15 is that DIY, do-it-yourself legal documents found online can be sufficient. And while that's true, online DIY legal documents can be a starting point, unless they are specifically customized to particular situations. It may not do the job effectively. Consulting with a legal professional is really the best way to ensure that contracts and agreements are comprehensive and tailored to your needs. But listen, I get it. Not everyone is able or willing to hire a lawyer to help them. And that's why I try to provide something for everyone. Free information like this show is for those who need to really bootstrap everything. And of course, there's done-for-you legal services for those who want the confidence you get when you know you have a professional handling things. But I also provide DIY tools and templates and instructions for those folks in that in-between zone. And those instructions and the customization is really where the rubber meets the road. Those are folks who can do it themselves, but they need a little help from their podcast lawyer friend. So if you are looking for high quality, specialized, attorney drafted legal forms and templates for podcasters, visit podcastlawforms.com. Now, myth number 16 is that social media alone is enough for marketing the podcast. And as much as I would like for that to be the case, relying solely on social media limits your reach. A multi-channel marketing strategy, including email newsletters, collaborations, SEO practices, all of that will really help to attract a broader audience and sustain growth. Myth number 17 says, I don't need to worry about tax implications until I'm making significant money. Well, understanding tax obligations from the very beginning will prevent future complications. This means knowing which expenses are going to be deductible and ensuring that you're complying with local, state, and federal tax laws so you don't wind up on the wrong size of an audit or a failure to file altogether, and that you also maximize the deductions you can take and save money by not having to pay more taxes than you need to. Myth number 18 talks about listener feedback not being all that important. It says, I know what my audience wants. I don't need to listen to them. Well, ignoring that kind of feedback can result in important missed opportunities to improve, and it can alienate your audience. Regularly engaging with your audience and acting on their feedback makes them feel like they're a part of something, and it'll enhance your content and foster their loyalty. Myth number 19 says, I can handle everything myself. I don't need a team. And while starting solo really is common, as your podcast grows, it becomes challenging to manage everything alone. I'm sure you've probably experienced this. Building a team or outsourcing tasks like editing, marketing, and administrative work can improve quality and allow you to focus on content creation. Just make sure you use good, solid contracts like those you find at podcastlawforms.com. Myth number 20, last but not least, only big podcasts need to worry about analytics and metrics. Well, tracking your analytics right from the beginning helps you understand your audience, It helps you measure your growth and make informed decisions. After all, what gets measured gets improved. So, this data really is crucial for attracting an audience, attracting sponsors, and improving your overall content strategy. But I want to include a caveat here, and that is don't be so obsessed with your stats at the very beginning. Those analytics are valuable, yes, but sometimes you have to go with your gut and trust that what you're doing is going to gain momentum. Nobody's show is perfect the first time out in probably the first 10 or 20 episodes. So use that time to not focus on the metrics, but focus on refining your processes and getting the production organized and figured out so you can do your best work and make great content. And then take a look at your analytics and see what you can do to grow once you've sort of got things underway and you've got all the nuts and bolts worked out. So that's going to be it for this episode. That's our list of top 20 business and legal myths that podcasters believe and that hold them back from achieving kind of greatness that they want, that impact, that influence and income. I hope you found this episode informative and that it helps you to avoid all of these common pitfalls. And listen, if you want to dive deeper into these and other similar topics, and you want to learn more about how to protect and grow your podcast the legal, business-like, professional way, become a legit podcast pro, I want to invite you to join my next free workshop. Head on over to event.podcastlaw.net to sign up. Coming up soon. And don't forget to check out the free resources, that Podcaster's Guide to Trademark Registration at podcasttrademark.com, the guest release form at podcastrelease.com, and the forms and templates page over at podcastlawforms.com. Thanks for listening. And until next time, keep your podcasting journey legit and legal.